Greetings, plant enthusiasts, friends of Vesper Meadow Education Program. Brian Geyer here, coming to you from my barn on a rainy day in May. We at Vesper Meadow had originally planned for a hands-on workshop this weekend focused on native plants that have traditional uses as foods. Because of the pandemic, we're not holding the hands-on part of that workshop, but rather releasing a couple of videos with the content that we had planned for that workshop. So this first video is going to focus on some tips and tools and techniques that I hope will make it easy for you to bring native foods into your life. The idea with starting with tools and techniques is to hopefully build a foundation of what you need in terms of materials, storage capacity, preservation methods, and ideas for using things, so that when you are out and you see an opportunity to harvest, you're more inclined to go ahead and engage in that harvest and bring that into your life. So we're kind of like laying the bricks of the foundation here. And in the next video, I'll share a list of plants and get into that level of detail where we're looking at a certain plant and this plant and that plant and what we can do with it, and some of the facts and history about plants. And that list will be a list of common plants, plants that we can harvest a part of the plant without killing the plant. Some of the plants that I think are more appropriate for a wider public use. Each of these videos is going to have a part of it where I'll go over some protocols or just considerations for how to engage in what some people call ethical harvesting, or what I like to say is just doing things in a good way. So the goal here, in sharing some techniques that I hope will make it easy for you to bring native foods into your diet, is to hopefully empower you to have a practice of harvesting, gathering, preserving, and using native foods in your diet, even if it's just a little bit here and there. The goal here is not to convince you to replace all the food that you eat with food that you gather from native plants. There are a lot of benefits that come from just having a little bit of native foods in your diet. First of all, it's actually attainable and easy for most of us to gather just a little bit here and there and put a little bit here and there into what we're already making in our kitchens. Another benefit of this is that even though it might be a little bit here or there, a lot of native foods, native plants have vitamins, minerals, enzymes that we don't normally eat in our everyday diets, since most of our food system can be traced back to just a handful of plants like corn and wheat and soybeans. Having just a little bit of native foods in your diet can have a lot of benefits. So again, the goal here is to just make it easy for you to hopefully establish a practice of having a good relationship with native plants and using them in your life. One more thing before we get started. If you can, and you're in a position to do so, please donate to the Vesper Meadow Education Program. There is a donate button below. Alright, so whenever we're working with plants or interacting with the natural world in general, of course, we want to try to do that in a good way. And obviously, humans can cause more harm than good. So now I want to go through 13 considerations to help us learn as we go and learn how to do things in a good way. And I call them considerations because they're questions, they're ways of thinking about things. It's not necessarily like I want to present to you, here's the one right way to do things, but rather here are some ways to think about it so that we can maybe not do it that one right way, but learn as we go how to be less wrong. The first consideration I have for you is, whose land are we on? Whose land are you going to visit? Whose land are you going to interact with, to harvest from? And when we're working with native plants, and if we're harvesting native plants for food, we're working with plants that are really like the legacy of the people who are indigenous to that area. So I think it's really important that we know a little something about the history of the area, who is indigenous to that area, who are the descendants of those folks, and to try to align our lives, our work, our effort in a way that is aware of that, and hopefully reciprocal, if not beneficial, to those folks. So here's a great book that I like to use to at least start to learn a little bit about an area. I like to take this with me if I'm ever traveling to a new area, or an area that's new to me, to Oregon. It has several chapters that cover different tribes, different areas, and it's a really great resource that I highly recommend in the effort of knowing whose land you're on. It's available through OSU Press. The second consideration I have for us is who currently owns or manages the land that we might be visiting. So if that's a private individual or family, that's something to consider, having their permission. If it's a public entity like the Forest Service, the BLM, whether it's National Forest, or if it's something like the Monument, Cascade City National Monument, a lot of those places may have different guidelines for using plants, so it's good to do a little bit of research to find out what those guidelines might be before you visit an area. Consideration number 3. Is the area clean or is it polluted? Here's a nice little patch of mint. Looks delicious. And it's pretty close to a road. So a lot of cars coming by, exhaust coming out. So it's just something to consider. A lot of folks don't like to harvest things that are too close to a road because of the exhaust and pollution. So is the area clean or not? Before we move on to the next considerations, I want to introduce this idea, in case you're not already introduced to it, of renewal capacity. Renewal capacity. So the idea is that the earth and living things have the capacity to renew themselves. Like migrating insects and animals have the capacity to return. Acorns have the capacity to come back the next year. Plants have the capacity to reproduce themselves and regenerate their populations. There's the capacity for the earth and living things to do so, but in order for that to happen, humans have to act appropriately with the natural environment so that that renewal capacity can happen. And in fact, it can only happen with appropriate human behavior towards living things. For consideration number 4, we're hanging out here with some blackberry plants. Consideration 4 is to use plants that are common and plants that are plentiful, and to harvest parts of plants in a way so that that original plant can still regenerate itself. So common plants, we want to avoid rare or endangered plants. Even with plants that are common, if they're not, for example, I've been out, noticed a tree that people had definitely been harvesting out of, so I'll skip over that tree, move to another one. And then we want to consider the plant part that we're taking. Whether we're picking berries from a plant, that plant is most likely going to survive into the future. If we don't pick all of the berries, that plant has the capacity to seed itself possibly, or feed wildlife. If we're harvesting something like camas root, camas, for example, we're harvesting that whole plant. And so there's some considerations there because can that plant regenerate itself or not? And do we even know, looking at the top of a camas plant, 10, 20 years old? We don't know. So just some things to consider. Number 5 and number 6, we have the visual aid of this dry erase board, which I've drawn this lovely picture on. In this lovely picture that I've drawn on the dry erase board, this is a road, and these little green dots are plants. Consideration number 5 is to harvest plants from a patch rather than a single plant out on its own. So the way that would work out here is if you drove in here, parked your car, walked in here, and you saw all these little plants out on their own, and these were the plants that you were looking for. And then you walked all the way here and you found this big patch. You can harvest 1 or 2 plants from here, or off of 1 or 2 plants from here, and not really affect the renewal capacity of that patch at all. Whereas if you had taken one of these out here, you might prohibit that plant from spreading this way. Or if you look closely, if you'd gotten out of your car this way and gone this way and found these 2 lonely little plants out here and taken them instead of looking for a patch, you might be stopping this plant from expanding its territory, so to speak, across this road and into a new area. Consideration number 6. We're still here at the whiteboard, but you may have noticed that things have changed a little bit. There's no longer a patch up here. And that's because in this scenario, this is a plant that may not grow in a patch. It likes to grow out on its own. So consideration number 6 asks us to consider to count to 4 before we take anything. So that would look like this. Again, you drove down the road, or maybe you rode your bike this time, and you got off your bike here and you walked out into this area here, and you started to count to 4 before you harvested. And you would count this one, you say 1, pass by that one, see this one, 2, pass by that one, 3, pass by that one, 4, pass by that one. Oh, there's still another one. This is an area where this plant is growing in a strong way, since I could count to 4 and there's still another one, so I could consider taking that one. However, if you've gotten off your bike here and walked this way, put this consideration into practice, and you counted 1, 2, and that's all you counted. You couldn't find any more down here, and you used that consideration, decided not to take any of those plants, then the renewal capacity of that plant to spread into this new area is still intact. Consideration number 7, with the visual aid of a stinging nettle plant. Number 7 is, how can we harvest in a low impact way? So this plant is kind of showing us a low impact harvest. On this smaller branch down here, you'll notice it still has the original growth tip at the top of the stem. This one here at the top of the stem's been broken off so that we could have some nettle for some tea. And where we broke it off is a low impact way to take some of this, rather than coming in and taking this whole plant home for tea. We've just taken the growth tip off, and at these 2 spots right here on either side down here, there's going to be new branches that will come back. Another example of a low impact harvest or a lower impact harvest would be, say you did want to dig up a plant and use the roots of it. If you waited until the plant had flowered and produced seed and maybe even spread some seed, then that may be less impactful than digging out the plant before it went to seed. How much to harvest? Well, you could consider only taking what you plan to use, only taking what you need. You may consider using everything that you take. You may consider making sure that you have left some for other people who might come there to gather things, or animals that may come there to gather, and also if the plant itself has enough to spread its seed around. And then alongside that, with how much to harvest, number 9 is how often. So just thinking about frequency. If you go to the same area every year or a couple times a year to harvest, you may consider leaving that area for a certain amount of time before coming back until the next time. Number 10, take some time to express gratitude for the plants. Take some time to experience gratitude for the plants and the places where they are existing. I had a summer camp director who taught me once that children learn respect when they experience gratitude. So we're all humans, we're all children one way or another. So if we give ourselves the opportunity, the time, take the time to experience gratitude for the plants, then we are learning how to respect them. Consideration number 11 is to go and visit the plants that you like to harvest from when you're not harvesting from them. So maybe not just going out at that one time of year to take from the plants, but rather go and visit them at different times of the year. This ties back into the gratitude thing in that it just gives you another opportunity to experience gratitude for the plants. It also will possibly let you see some things about the landscape that you didn't otherwise know, because some plants may be there at a different time of year that you weren't aware about, that now you are aware about, so you have learned something about not disturbing those plants. And it will only serve to deepen your connection to the plants in that place. Something that was recommended to me that I've really enjoyed is camping out at spots where you like to gather and experiencing that spot at night and in the morning, and just making observations and experiencing gratitude and having great experiences all along the way. All right, congratulations. You've made it to the last 2 considerations on our list. I'm proud of you. Number 12 is to bring something to take notes in, so a journal or just some paper. There's a couple different reasons why I think this is a decent idea. You can take your own notes about, say, the date, the place that you're going to, the plant that you're visiting and using, and that can become your own record for the future. And then you can also make observations of the place to do a little bit of monitoring. So you could count the plants in a given area and then come back later and count the plants again and compare those things. You could measure plants in an area and then come back and measure them again and see what kind of impacts that you might observe happening on the plant. And then lastly, number 13 is you can consider tending to plants. So there's lots of different ways that you can tend to plants. You could collect seed from the plant and plant it into the ground nearby. You could collect some of the seed from the plant and give it to a gardener friend to try growing it out. And then you can also familiarize yourself with some other methods of tending to plants. Like if you can learn how to prune, you could take pruners with you and prune back old growth and help the plant thrive. Oh, hey! So, now let's talk about some things that are useful to have with you when you're going out on an excursion to interact with native plants. The first thing I recommend is a journal or something to take notes on. Second thing I would recommend, if you're not already an expert that's 100% sure of all the plants that you're going to go hang out with, are some books to help you identify things. So I like to carry around this Peterson's Guide, and I was lucky enough to be the one that had this one checked out from the library when the pandemic hit, so I get to keep it for a little bit longer. Flowers of the Table Rocks. This is an excellent resource, highly recommended for learning about our native plants. Another thing, bags. Plastic bags, paper bags, useful for different situations. If you're taking home something dirty, if you're collecting something that needs a little breathing room. Another thing are gloves and rags or towels to help keep you clean, keep you protected. If you are going to be doing any cleaning of things out there, sometimes it's really useful to have a towel. Now, a couple of things you may consider to use for making harvesting a little bit easier. Different kinds of containers to harvest into. This is what I call a harvest bucket. Very technical. Pick this tip up working on farms and such, but with this bucket you can see I've got a way to tie it around my waist, and then you can also tie another thing around your head. Well, anyway, so that it sits right in front of you while you're harvesting. You can have both hands free, and when you do find a patch of things that you're picking, you can pick a lot more and they'll stay protected in this little bucket. The harvest bucket. Another alternative to the harvest bucket, or something that might be useful in different situations, is a kitchen colander. For whatever reason, I really prefer the steam bucket inside this kitchen contraption. So this is a steamer that some people have in their kitchens. This is the steam bucket that goes on the inside that you put the vegetables or whatever in that you're steaming. I like to carry this around for harvesting mushrooms because it's got these holes so the mushrooms can still spore as you walk around, and it's nice and hard and keeps the mushrooms protected in there so they don't get all mushy while you go. For observations, a lot of plant people like to carry around a hand lens. My little friend Ingram gave me this one that's a turtle that I like to carry around. Thank you, Ingram. And then a few small tools that can fit in the back of your backpack, like this is a digging tool, acts as a digging stick for popping things out of the ground. A pair of snips, maybe in case you want to do some cutting or light pruning, if you're going to get into some tending while you're about. And then other things that I recommend having with you are, of course, a map of the area that you're going, and a compass if you're going to be going off trail. It's very easy to get disoriented in the forest. I didn't know this for a long time, but a lot of phones have compasses built into them, into apps, which is pretty cool. And then lastly, a camera is nice to take pictures with. So those are all things that you can put in your backpack, that you can take with you, depending on where you're going, what you want to harvest. And then a couple of things that it's useful just to have maybe back at your vehicle are some larger containers to put things in, because maybe you're making multiple trips of going out to get stuff, and you're coming back and you're putting them in a central location and then going back out for a second foray. So small or large coolers can be useful in some instances, or just smaller or large boxes. So hopefully that helps. Those are some tools that I like to use, and we're going to be moving on from here. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to my kitchen. So while we're in the kitchen, we're not going to talk specifically about recipes or cooking necessarily. I'm going to continue on with this theme of just sharing tips and techniques. And these specifically are tips and techniques for preserving food once you brought it in to the kitchen. Because a lot of times when you're out wildcrafting and you find things, you find more than you can use that night. And so having a few methods and techniques of preserving food can be really useful for getting more of that food into our lives. So first thing that we'll talk about is just drying plants. So if you're bringing home, say, some stinging nettle, and you've got a lot, more than you could eat that night, and or you just want to preserve some, you could dry it. A simple way to dry plants is to just bundle them with a rope and tie them up somewhere that's dark and dry and let them dry that way. I like to build drying racks and have them around, and I'll show you one of those. It's made out of simple pieces of wood put together in a rectangle. It's an old screen here, and then in the middle there's this piece that kind of helps hold the screen up in case you wanted to put something that had a little more weight on it so that the screen doesn't get pushed down too far. And you can stack these on top of one another and have a whole scene capable of drying lots of things all at once. Once things are dry, it's nice to keep them in. I like to keep things in glass containers with lids on them to keep critters out. Ball jars or these canning type jars are nice with a lid because nothing can get in, but a little bit of air could come out if it needed to. Just to inspire. Here is some stinging nettle that's dried and in a jar, ready to become tea, or it could be rehydrated and cooked into dishes, or you could pound it up and make it into a powder that you could use it. You could then use it as a spice. Leaves that you can dry. You can put roots like these dandelion roots on a drying rack to dry, and then put them into the jar, and you've got plenty of dandelion tea, or you could use these in soups or stews. Two things that came from the same plant at different times. So wild roses are blooming right now, and these are not wild roses, it's a cultivated variety, but the petals you can dry and keep around for making a really lovely tea, or just like a rose water that you could use to flavor other things like smoothies. The rose plants will make these rose hips that are lovely to gather and dry, and also make really great teas. Dried food, although it wasn't dried on the racks. This is cedar ash. So the cedar we dried indoors here, and then when it was safe to burn it outside, we burned the green parts of the branches while holding on to the thicker branches with tongs. Collected the ash in a little metal tray, and then sifted through the ash to pull out the little bits of branches and such. And what you're left is with this really highly mineralized, really nutritious ash that can be used in cooking in lots of different ways. Turns food kind of a blue color and gives it a nice, slightly smoky, cedary flavor. And then of course some foods just come dried anyway. These are some walnuts that were cleaned up that are just dried, and we can just keep them in a bowl where we can see them and hang out with them here in the kitchen. That's a little bit about drying things. Let's talk about freezing things for a second. Most of us have freezers. A couple of things that we like to freeze a lot of are mushrooms and elderberries. So for freezing things like mushrooms, we like to lay them out, cut them, or after they're cleaned and sliced, lay them out on a tray and freeze the whole tray, and then pack them after they're frozen into big bags, so we can fit a lot into a bag. And then they're frozen, and when you go in to get one, they just pop out really easily as one or two things. You don't have this big mushy mash of things. Okay, a couple more notes about freezers. Freezers can be used in the processing of some foods. For example, if you're wanting to pick elderberries and you want to get the fruits off of the stems, it can be very time consuming while out at an elderberry plant to pick each individual berry off of a cluster. Alternatively, you could cut the entire cluster of berries, bring them back home with you, put the entire cluster, stems and all, on a freezer tray, freeze it, and then when it's frozen, it's very easy to break those little berries off of the stems and separate those two. And that's a way that freezer can kind of be useful in the one step in the process of processing something. Another way a freezer can be used, or we like to use the freezer, is to aid in the processing of food that takes a lot of time or energy to process. So for something like acorns that take many steps, gathering, drying, leaching, we've put a lot of work so far of gathering, drying, and leaching into these acorns. That's also been grinded up into flour, so it's pretty much ready to use, but we still have to take the next steps of incorporating it into a recipe. But at least now we've got it ready to use, and so it's on hand in the freezer. And again, we're not going to replace all of the flour in a recipe with acorn flour. We might just add a little bit here and there to things as we bake, and that way we get a little bit of the acorn goodness a little bit at a time over time. Another food that we have in the freezer that's very easy to incorporate native plants into are pestos. So pestos are commonly made with basil, oil, roasted nuts or seeds, and salt. And it's a very easy way to just incorporate a little bit of wild and or native plant into your diet. Good candidates are the dandelion leaf, or any other green that would be listed in a wild edibles book or native edibles book as a salad green or for raw eating. Any other way that we are preserving foods in the kitchen is an opportunity to incorporate native plants into our diet. So some examples of preservation methods that you might be using at home are canning vegetables, fermenting vegetables, and both canning and fermenting are great opportunities to incorporate a little bit of native wild food plant into your diet. For example, we make a lot of chutneys in our kitchen, which we love to eat. They're really versatile foods. They're super yummy. Chutneys are basically like a fruit mixture with typically apple cider vinegar and some strong spices. And this year I'm really excited to make some chutneys with choke cherries and maybe some with elderberries as well. Okay, next let's talk about smoothies for a second, because they're not necessarily long-term preserving, but they are a way to process and preserve wild plants in your kitchen. So for smoothies, we just need a blender. And here I'm talking specifically about using like edible greens in smoothies. So this is a miner's lettuce. This is another miner's lettuce. This is some other miner's lettuce. We have a couple dandelion greens. They're not too bitter yet, early spring. Just a couple in there. and a little bit of wild fennel. So to incorporate these in a smoothie, I would put the greens in there first, add a good bit of water, and just blend those two things together first to make sure that the greens get all incorporated, and then add your fruits and sweeteners as you wish, and other superfoods that you like. And that little bit of fresh raw greens will really pack a punch of nutrition and loveliness into your smoothies. Okay, one last thing. This isn't necessarily a food thing. It's kind of quirky, but I like it and I want to share it. It's making a hydrosol. So a hydrosol is basically like super clean distilled water in a bottle that has the essence of plants in it, that you can spritz, and you can spritz yourself depending on the plant, or surfaces if you're doing a little cleaning. One plant that I would recommend for making a really lovely hydrosol out of is cedar. So again, this is that steamer contraption from the kitchen that I said I'd like to harvest mushrooms into. If we were making cedar hydrosol, we would put a bunch of cedar branches into here, in smaller, large pieces, whatever just fits into here. We put a couple inches of water into here, and then we're basically going to be putting it onto a heat source, steaming through it, and then the steam's going to hit the lid, drop back down, and we're going to collect it. And that steam is going to be distilled water, so it's super clean, and it's going to have the essence of the plant in it. So it's a way of preserving it. And the way you capture it is that the steam is going to rise up. Again, it's going to hit the lid. We're going to put the lid on upside down, so that the steam is going to hit the lid, kind of condense into the middle of the lid, and then start dripping down. And so to collect it, just take a little bowl, put it right in the middle on top of the cedar branches, and that little bowl is going to collect the cedar hydrosol. It's basically distilled water with the essential oil of cedar. I think that's the correct way of thinking about it or saying it. But anyway, it's clean and it will last a long time. You can pour it into one of these little spritzer bottles, and then you have a nice cedar spritzer for your home, for your body, for your car, or you could use it in cleaning perhaps. Lastly, for anybody that's interested in cooking, preserving, using native foods in your kitchen, I want to recommend the Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen book, or just the Sioux Chef. You can follow this person online. It's very inspirational. Alright everyone, thanks so much for joining in on this effort and watching this video. We're going to cruise to the end of the video hanging out with this little chokecherry plant. We'll release another video later this week that is going to go into more specifics about specific plants and specific uses. But I wanted to start with this overview of ethics and some broad view of tools and techniques, just to kind of get us prepped and ready. Again, if you're able to, if you can and want to support this work, please use the donate link below. Cheers.